The third and final seat on the Court of Appeals that will be on your ballot this year is that which is currently held by Judge Cressie Thigpen. His opponent is Dillon. We've asked these two gentlemen to respond to the following. Judicial independence is the idea that the judiciary needs to be kept away from the other branches of government. That is, courts should not be subject to improper influence from the other branches of government or from private or partisan interests. Yet in North Carolina, we continue to elect judges, which forces judicial candidates to raise money from PACs, private parties, and the legal community. How do we balance judicial independence with the practical aspect of judicial candidates having to raise money? Dillon.
Good afternoon. My name is Dillon, and I'm a candidate for the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and I want to thank you all for having us today. It's that time to elect judges again, and we've been traveling around the state, and sometimes we feel like General Stockdale. If you remember Ross Perot's candidate, people ask us, who are you and why are you here? And the reason we get that question is because if you think back in 2008, 4 million people voted in North Carolina voted for the governor's race, 4 million people voted for the president, and over 4 million people voted for the superintendent of public instruction, but less than 3 million people voted in the Court of Appeals races. So right now, a lot of your friends and you are getting these voter guides in the mail, and a lot of your friends, as my friends have always done as an attorney, will ask you, who are these people and what is this voter guide? And so I appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about myself because I know y'all are going to all be asked that question. I am 47 years old and I live in Raleigh with my wife and children. And like all the other candidates, I've been a licensed attorney for over 20 years, and during my career I've had the opportunity to represent people at every level of the state court system, from small claims court all the way to the Supreme Court. And I've appeared in over a third of our courthouses, from Brevard probably all the way over to Swan Quarter. And my practice has been varied. Right now I represent one of our state licensing boards, and I represent a lot of individuals before others. And I also work with a lot of small business owners and handle a variety of real estate matters. But I want to tell you why I'm running for the Court of Appeals, and I'll list 3 reasons. First, I'm running because I really believe the court needs to be nonpartisan. I'm honored to be endorsed by men and women representing a broad range of political perspectives and walks of life rather than just one political perspective. I'm endorsed by former mayors of Raleigh from both parties, as well as a former member of the Raleigh City Council who's an independent. I'm represented by former members of the General Assembly from both parties. I'm endorsed by former chairs of both state political parties and from businessmen and women from all over the state from all political perspectives. And we all can say that we want to be fair, so I want to, the other night we had a forum and we were all asked about fairness, and so I want to quote something that was in the paper today that was a quote that apparently I gave during the forum. I'll quote the paper, it probably said it better than I did. Basically it said that fairness in the courts can wind up being in the eye of the beholder unless a judge follows the legal process fairly. We're all human, so we may all have a slightly different perspective of what fair is. And I just gave a personal example. I have 5 children, and if I take my 2 daughters out and buy them both dresses and I spend a little bit more money on one of them, they'll look at me and say, the other one will say, that's not fair. But what's really not fair is the fact that I bought them dresses at all and they didn't earn it. And I'm trying to teach my kids what fairness, and y'all can probably all relate to that. So I think all we can really do is ensure that the process is legal. We can't ensure a fair result. Second, I'm running really because of my experience. Not only do I have years of experience practicing law, but I've also worked with small businesses and in small businesses. I've owned my own real estate services company. I'm licensed by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. And I also worked at a small community bank in Raleigh that I helped start back in 2006, working with a lot of people from all walks of life. And so I just think since the court handles a variety of appeals, the court would benefit from having at least one judge up there that has both legal experience and business experience. And finally, I'm running because I really do want to serve. I do not seek to serve to represent any political perspective or really the perspective of the defense attorneys or the advocates of justice members. I've never really been a member of either organization. Rather, I desire to represent all North Carolinians. I had a boss one time that had a sign on his desk that said, do it right, and do it right now. And as a judge, I would follow that. So if I'm elected, I pledge to read everything you guys write, hear all the parties, apply the law as it is, not that what I wish it would be, and I will only write opinions based on the matters that are before the court. I won't go talking about tangential matters because that has a lot of, I think that can be very dangerous to do that. And finally, I'll get my decisions out quickly because I realize that there's people behind these cases and they need to get on with their lives. And it's probably frustrating that you get phone calls all the time, has a decision come down. I think that's very important. Regarding the question, how do we balance judicial independence with the practical aspects of judicial candidates having to raise money? You know, the subject of judicial super PACs came up the other night in a forum that we had, and I think there was an email going around saying that there was a super PAC that might have been formed for the benefit of the Court of Appeals candidates. I don't know anybody that's formed. I personally don't know anybody that would be interested in basically giving money to a bunch of James Stockdales. I don't know. I'm totally unfamiliar with any super PACs that have been formed for the Court of Appeals candidates. But to answer your question, it's really up to each candidate. You know, we all have the opportunity to raise a limited amount of money to qualify for public finance, and before we have to raise between $40,000 and $80,000, but we do have the opportunity to raise a little bit of money, and if we want to get PAC money, we can. I chose not to. I don't want to raise any PAC money, and I didn't. Basically, most of the money I raised was just money from friends of mine who just know me and just thought that I might be a good judge, and they just wanted to support me. I try not to get a lot of money from attorneys who might appear before me. I have no idea who is supporting my opponent or who gave him money, and I don't want to know because I don't think there should be any bias. So I think, you know, how can you keep the political process out of it? It just depends on how we behave. I mean, if we want to behave in a political way, we will, and if we don't want to, we don't. So all I can do is look how we behaved, and it's up to the voters. So, you know, in closing, I would just ask that if your friends ask you, you'll get that question, I would appreciate that you would consider telling them to vote for me, Chris Dillon. So thank you for your time.
Judge Thigpen?
Good afternoon. My name is Cressie Thigpen. I'm a judge on the Court of Appeals, and I'd first of all like to thank the Association of Defense Attorneys and the North Carolina Chamber for having this forum and for giving us the opportunity to come and share some thoughts with you. There are three things that I'd really like to talk about. One is I'd like to talk about the things that I feel strongly about as a judge. Secondly, I'd like to talk a little about myself and where I'm from. And then I'd like to try and answer the question that has been posed to two of us. I've been on the court now for just a little over 2 years. And there are a couple of things that I strongly believe in. The first thing that I believe in is being fair. And what this means to me is listening to both sides of an argument before rendering a decision. It means following the law. And on the appellate bench, it means reading everything that the lawyers write, understanding how much time you all put into preparing your cases and also preparing the briefs. The second thing that I believe in is service. I believe that lawyers and judges ought to give back to the state and ought to give back to the citizens. In this respect, for 11 years, I served on the North Carolina State Bar Council. And in 1999, I was elected president of the North Carolina State Bar. I was the first African-American elected president of the State Bar in the 66-year history of the State Bar. For 9 years, I served on the Board of Trustees at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And for 5 years, I served on the Board of Trustees at North Carolina Central University. And for 3 years, I was the chairman of that board. The last thing that I strongly believe in is that judges should be courteous and respectful to all who appear before them. I tried to do this as a Superior Court judge, and I've tried to do it now as a judge on the Court of Appeals. Just to tell you a little about myself, I grew up in North Carolina, and although I grew up in North Carolina, I grew up in 3 different places. The first 6 years I grew up in Greensboro, which is where my mother is from. The next 6 years I grew up in Rayford, Hope County. And then the last 6 years I grew up in Fayetteville, which is where my father is from. But I tell folks that growing up in that small town of Rayford really taught me the value of hard work and responsibility, because every morning before I went to school, I had to get up and feed the chickens. And then every evening when I came back from school, I had the responsibility of feeding the hogs. And that work ethic has followed me ever since I grew up in that small town of Rayford. I attended the public school system in Fayetteville. I attended North Carolina Central University undergraduate, and my major was business administration. I attended Rutgers University School of Law, and I enrolled in the joint JD MBA program, stayed in that program until I ran into quantitative analysis. Then I decided just to become a lawyer. I practiced with the law firm in Raleigh of Thigpen, Blue, Stevens, and Fellers. The first 10 years of my practice, I handled just about everything, sort of what we do on the Court of Appeals. Domestic matters, I represented plaintiffs, I represented defendants, criminal matters, civil matters, workers' comp claims, real estate matters. The last 25 years, I concentrated in business litigation, business matters, and I was also general counsel for Shaw University. In 2008, I was appointed to the Superior Court bench as a special Superior Court judge. And then in 2010, I was appointed to the Court of Appeals, which is where I now serve. I'd like to try and answer the question that was posed. It's difficult to talk about money in elections, and even judicial elections. There are various models that are now being discussed about the best way of electing judges. Ours is that judges are elected in North Carolina. In some states, they are appointed. In others, you have a combination between appointed and elected positions. And in some, you have retention. I'm not really sure what the best method is, but my guiding light would be whatever method, whatever system we could initiate that ensures the independence of the judiciary. To me, that is the guiding light. I think that we, although we elect judges, have a pretty good system, primarily because we have public financing. And so no one can give more than $500 to any candidate. And I think it's difficult to argue that anyone would have any undue influence on a judge by giving a contribution of $500. Once it gets beyond that, then I think we begin to erode and create a perception that justice can be purchased. And I think that's the danger of having outside money, of having money coming in, and large sums of money coming into judicial races. I'd like to thank you all again for having me and for having us. Would really appreciate your support, but thank you so much for being here.